today with Empowering Inclusive Learning, Leveraging Accessibility Metadata in Ontario's Post-Secondary Libraries. We have with us Charles LaPierre, the Principal Accessibility and Content Quality Architect at Benetech. We also have Madeleine Rothberg, the Senior Subject Matter Expert at the National Center for Accessible Media at GBH, and Christopher Carr, the Special Materials Cataloging Librarian at Concordia University.
All right. All right. I guess we'll get right into it. Hello, everyone. My name is Charles LaPierre. I am the Principal Accessibility Content Quality Architect here at Benetech. And joining me today, we'll have Madeleine Rothberg from the National Center for Accessible Materials at GBH, sorry, and then Christopher Carr from Concordia University Library. All right, so that's our
Hi,
information.
everyone. It's Madeleine, and I'm gonna kick us off. Charles, are you sharing slides and I don't see them?
I think I am.
You're sharing.
Okay, I might just not have my windows arranged right. Sorry about that. 1 second. There it is. Sorry, my mistake. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with an overview and tell you a little bit about what we'll be speaking about today, and then we're each going to share some information. So we're going to start by talking about what accessibility metadata is, if you haven't come across it before. And then we're going to talk about work that we've been doing collaboratively on a crosswalk between different forms of accessibility metadata, including EPUB, ONIX, MARC, Unimarc. We're going to introduce you to a new guide that's available called the Accessibility Metadata Guide, which is a guide to presenting data to users. And then we're going to talk about what's going on with library metadata for accessibility, what you can do if you'd like to get involved, and hopefully have plenty of time for your questions. Next slide. Accessibility metadata, like other metadata, is information meant to be read by computers. So it's computer-to-computer exchange of technical information about a resource. Accessibility metadata specifically talks about what is accessible or inaccessible about the resource. And it's important that it be both, that it communicate what's accessible for somebody who's searching for a particular thing, but also what's inaccessible for somebody who needs to avoid a certain feature or to warn them before they go ahead and acquire a resource that it might not work for them. So this could be information on the accessibility features, like are the images described? Are the videos captioned? Are there good headings and structural navigation features, things like that. It's very important to warn about hazards. So the most well-known one is that some light patterns can cause seizures in people with light-sensitive epilepsy, and there are also some other hazards as well. And those need to be very clearly marked so that users can avoid harming themselves. There may also be some accommodations for different forms of reading. The metadata can state whether or not the resource conforms with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, because that covers a host of issues if it is in conformance. There might also be certification information, which is useful for legal or organizational requirements. And then finally, there may be a human-readable summary of accessibility, generally aimed at getting at more subtle issues that are hard to express specifically with the metadata. Like, if you've got a dictionary and there's audio pronouncing each word, that doesn't mean that it's an audio book, but it does have some audio. And so the human readable summary might explain that, for example. So the metadata itself can be found in a couple of different places depending what kind of file you're using or how the provider is providing the metadata. EPUB files can hold their metadata right inside of them. So the OPF file can have the accessibility metadata inside. On the other hand, you can also communicate metadata from outside of a file in a separate metadata file. And this is commonly used for ONIX, which is the publishing industry chain, supply chain metadata that has accessibility features fully described, and that would tend to be held outside the file. Note that if you are using ONIX, you need to be sure you're using ONIX 3.0 or later, because that's where the accessibility support really kicks in. You might also be holding metadata in MARC records, and those might be derived from EPUB or derived from ONIX. So some of the ways that the metadata is meant to be used include that publishers can disclose the accessibility of their publications. And so if you have purchasing requirements at your institution, you can check to see if publishers are meeting their obligations. If you're running a bookstore style interface, you can help customers find accessible materials so that they're making informed purchasing decisions. In a schools or library context, the informed purchasing decisions come probably before the end users get to it. So you could use this metadata in your own purchasing process to look for the most accessible versions to procure for your users. And you can use comparisons of metadata across your resources to document your progress toward increasing the accessibility of your collection. And then finally, of course, the end users, the readers, the people who want those books, they need to know that what they're about to read, buy, download meets their needs. And this can be important when there's more than one edition of a book. For example, a user might want to know which is the most accessible version of this book if there's more than one, and that saves lots of time and frustration. So the metadata ecosystem is pretty complex. And in our documents, we have created this diagram. It's available at the link, and our slides are available from the conference website with an image description there. But to describe this image, I would say the digital publishing ecosystem offers a variety of forms of file format, each of which has a different reference source for where you can learn about their metadata for accessibility and how to process it. So to walk through the chains, if you're working with EPUB, there's a document called EPUB Accessibility Metadata 1.1. I believe that may be getting an update soon. That tells you what metadata to write for your book. And then the document we're going to introduce to you in more detail in a moment, the display techniques document, shows you if you've got metadata, how can you interpret it for users who are using your publications. And we've got a specific techniques document meant just for EPUB. If you're working with PDFs, the documents that describe how to make PDF accessible are PDF UA1, PDF UA2, and well-tagged PDF, WT PDF. And the PDF community is active in working on improving their accessibility metadata as well. If you're working with ONIX records, there is an ONIX note available from Editeur, who are the team that supports ONIX, and it's called Providing Accessibility Metadata in ONIX Advanced, because they've got a lot of great features there. You can then use that in conjunction with the display techniques for ONIX accessibility metadata, all of which informs the display for end users. And then finally, if you've got MARC records, there are currently 2 accessibility fields in MARC records, and we've got a crosswalk that attempts to share how we can work on that. And Chris Carr is going to speak in detail about that at the end of the talk, because the MARC work is ongoing. So I'm going to hand it over to Charles to talk a little bit about certification and some other topics.
Yeah, so part of the EPUB specification, the 1.1 specification, highlights how does this EPUB conform to the various specifications, right? And we've heard about WCAG, and an EPUB can conform to various different levels of WCAG, level single A, double A, but also what version of WCAG, the 2.0, 2.1, or the recently 2.2. And if you make that conformance claim so that you know that this book is as accessible, well, then who made that claim, right? So was it certified by a self-certification by the publisher? It's not in their best interest to, to highlight any issues, right? So if you get third party, that's where we can have an independent third party to do the checking. And Benetech has created our GCA program, which is our Global Certified Accessible, with over 80 plus publishers now that have been certified, mostly in US and Canada and a few outside of in Europe. And actually, eBound Canada got certified by Benetech, and they're certifying the Canadian publishers to help make the Canadian publishers create born accessible books that conform to the standards. And you could also have authorized entities like libraries, remediated content. And in addition, there could also be a certifier credential if by third parties like Benetech's GCA, where we have our own credential, Global Certified Accessible, and that's backed by the DAISY Consortium. So this is something that you could look for, and then our stamp there is on the right-hand corner, which some publishers are putting on their jacket cover, and others just posting it on the website, showing that this book has been certified accessible. All right, now we've been working on this metadata crosswalk between EPUB, ONIX, MARC, and soon to be added PDF and Unimark, etc. So we have a link here to a GitHub repository that this is actively being worked on in a community group in the W3C. And here is an example of the accessibility features. A snippet here, what this crosswalk looks like. So in column 1 in this table, you have the definition, and that would have things like alternative text is provided for visual content, i.e. the HTML alt attribute, right? And then in schema.org, which is actually the metadata inside of the EPUB, you would have things like alternative text, all one word, right, with camel case. So that's the value that you need to put in there. For ONIX records, list 196 is the famous accessibility list in ONIX, and code 14 is specific for short alternative descriptions. And so in an ONIX feed, if you see that list 196 code 14, you know that images have alt text descriptions. And then similarly for MARC 21, there is a mapping to what that would look like in MARC 21 and also in Unimark. And some of them don't have a mapping. And some of these mappings are not round trippable. You can't go from schema.org to ONIX to MARC and then back to schema.org. It might not be a one-to-one because there might be 2 or 3 different ONIX values that represent that have to be all of there in order to map back to a single schema.org piece of metadata. So we're working on it. This is a work in progress, and this is going to be hopefully released shortly and already we're looking at the future to try to improve and add more values in here and add to the ONIX. So it's definitely a work in progress. And in February of this year, we released the second version of the accessibility metadata guide. And this comprises of 2 main areas: the principles document showing the fundamental principles of how to display this very technical metadata in a user-friendly way. And then we get into specific techniques for an EPUB. How do you look into the OPF file and find the actual code, alternative text in there and then how do you display that? And all of that nuances are in that document. And then similarly, we have the ONIX accessibility metadata technique. There's going to be future work for PDFs, because this is not just for EPUBs. This can be applied to other types of media, PDFs, and then hopefully there'll be a MARC guide as well. So these are all things that's going to be improving in the future. And the way that we're now displaying this accessibility metadata is we took the original version and we went out and shared it with folks around the world, and they came back and said, yeah, you know what, this doesn't really map well to our culture, our language, because screen reader friendly, which is a term that we use here, doesn't mean anything over there. And they're like, oh, you have a screen that's friendly to you? They're like, I don't understand what this means, right? So we had to come up with some new language. We also need to make sure that it was international, like translatable into other languages. So a big, huge effort is on the 2.0 version of this document that covers that. And we've also reorganized the data to try to put the most important information first, and that is ways of reading. So you have visual adjustments, supports non-visual reading. That was the, screen reader friendly for, the screen readers. And then you have pre-recorded audio. If this is an audio book, you'd have that information there. And then most importantly, conformance metadata. Does this conform to a standard? And if so, which one? And then who certified that? Who's making that claim? And do they have a credential? So you can trust there that this book is really at that level, right? Because I've definitely seen some publishers claim to be WCAG 2.2, 2.1 AA compliant, and there was no alt text descriptions in the book, which is clearly a violation of WCAG. And then you have, for navigation, can this book be navigated? Rich content, is there like MathML in the book that's very now very accessible to ways that people with screen readers can access that math in an accessible way? And then, like Madeleine was talking about, hazards. Is there any hazards in the book? And like their flashing, motion simulation, and sound hazards. So that you can disclose that or say that there is none, because I don't have any audio content in my book, right? The accessibility summary is a human readable string that's in the EPUB itself or in the ONIX record that you would just display. And this would be a way that the publisher can add more information that's beyond just the machine readable metadata in the book. And for example, if there was a hazard, you could say in video on page 55 at timestamp 5 minutes, there is a 5-second clip of a strobe light that you may want to, be aware of. And then also if there's any legal considerations, with the European Accessibility Act going into effect there, they have some exemptions for micro enterprise, et cetera. So that could be disclosed in here if they want. And then any additional information that didn't fit into any one of these categories. This is what it would look like. And you'll notice that there's two different versions. There's the compact version of what to display, and then there's more descriptive version. And then either the developer can choose or allow that option to be customized by the end user. So would you rather see for ways of reading appearance can be modified? What does that exactly mean? If you go to the descriptive one, the appearance of the text and page layout can be modified according to the capabilities of the reading system, the font size, etc. Right? So we offer these two different options, and again, allow it to be translated, all of these, into other languages. And thanks to VitalSource, we have over 30 languages ready to go. So with this document, folks that want to display this metadata in a user-friendly way has all of the tools that they need on how to do it, and then different languages if they wanted to use it. And I see this as like the nutrition label for like a can of soup. This is your nutrition label of accessibility label for an accessible book, right? So you know the exact word to look for that will suit your specific needs. And these are links again for the visual adjustments for both the EPUB technique or the ONIX technique, where it's showing specifics on how that would look. And if I quickly went over to here, I could actually see these. And this is a W3C community group note, visual adjustments. We define the variables, and then this is actually how you set those variables. So this, again, for a developer, it's very technical, where to look inside of the OPF file for display transformability. And then when you have that, then you say, this is how you would display, and this ID is that ID into that file. That's either the English file or the French file, and then how to display that, either the compact version or the descriptive version. And lastly, for my part of the presentation here is the DAISY metadata previewer. And this is a really cool little app that DAISY has provided where you can just drop in, it's a web link, drop it in your metadata from the OPF file or from the ONIX feed, and then see what it's going to look like. So I actually have that here, where you just drop in this metadata, very technical metadata, and then hit preview. And then up on the screen, you'll see exactly the ways of reading. Appearance can be modified. And if I switch from compact to descriptive, boom, it automatically changes and gives you that more descriptive version. And, right now the previewer has about 6 languages here. I could switch to French, and now I have the French version here, which would be very, and maybe, bookstores or libraries in Canada, you would have the English and French as predefined right there for everyone. And then, if the book was certified, at least by GCA, you could actually even put in our stamp saying that this book is certified. And that would be something that would trigger and show folks, oh, this is a book that has passed certification and meets the accessibility 1.1, WCAG 2.1 level single A or double A, right? And then the rest of the information about navigation, rich content, if there's any hazards, accessibility summary, etc. So there you have it. And now I will pass this over to Chris.
Thank you, Charles. When I'm ready to move to the next slide, I'll just say next, okay?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon. I and Chris Oliver, formerly of the University of Ottawa, have been working with Charles and Madeleine as part of the W3C Publishers Community Accessibility Task Force. The focus of our work has been on translating descriptive metadata found in EPUBs into MARC 21 to allow for searching, filtering, and identification of accessible resources in library catalogs. This slide shows another snippet from the Accessibility Properties crosswalk, displaying the schema terms for structural navigation, synchronized audio text, and table of contents. The crosswalk provides a list of schema codes along with their definitions, ONIX equivalents, and examples of how the schema terms can be recorded in MARC 21. Suggestions for recording ONIX codes in MARC 21 are still under development. Next. The current crosswalk is focused on metadata found in the EPUB package, including both schema vocabulary, as well as EPUB-specific vocabulary describing conformance to accessibility standards and publisher exemptions to the European Accessibility Act. Schema vocabulary is used to describe accessibility features, accessibility hazards, access modes, and to signal the presence of a free text accessibility summary. Next. In MARC 21, there are 2 fields that can be used to record metadata about accessibility. The 341 accessibility content field is used to record accessibility metadata using controlled vocabulary or codes, while the 532 accessibility note field is used for recording information about accessibility using free text. Only 2 source codes are currently approved for use with field 341, the schema.org accessibility properties for discoverability vocabulary and ONIX. Next. The MARC 21 format is used to describe all library formats, accessible formats such as DAISY and Braille, born accessible ebooks such as EPUB, as well as remediated library resources and audiovisual materials. MARC 21 is also used in all library sectors, from academic to school libraries, internationally, and in many different languages across the globe. All of these factors need to be considered when creating MARC 21 fields and developing best practices for their use. Next. Library metadata is recorded in bibliographic records to support user tasks. The IFLA library reference model defines 5 user tasks: find, identify, select, obtain, and explore. In the context of accessibility, metadata can help users find accessible resources, identify which resources are accessible, select resources based on personal user preferences, and understand how selected resources may be accessed. Controlled vocabulary, whether recorded as terms or codes, is essential to filtering and sorting as well as searching. Notes are included to provide more detail in human readable form, but can also be rich sources of key keywords used in searching. Next. Different types of metadata are used in MARC 21. Codes, such as ISO codes for languages, as well as schema and ONIX. Controlled vocabulary, such as LCSH, free text, and URIs. Next. As I've already mentioned, 2 codes are currently approved for use with the 341 field. Schema is a code that would be understandable to most English speakers, despite the camel case format, but not to speakers of other languages. ONIX is a set of numeric lists and codes that is available in many languages and is currently favored by European libraries, though it is still not clear how ONIX should be recorded in MARC 21. In this example I've provided here, I've used square brackets in the ONIX examples to show the different ways ONIX could be recorded. Next. Here's an example of an ONIX code for the accessibility feature short alternative textual descriptions, which would be represented in ONIX as list 196 code 14. The heading short alternative textual descriptions is not meant to be part of the code, but is included to quickly identify the meaning of the code. A full description of when the code should be used follows the heading. Next. Here's an example of how codes are actually recorded in an ONIX message. The statements to the right include the headings, which are provided to make the ONIX messages more user-friendly. ONIX is used by publishers to communicate information about publications to vendors and booksellers. Many publishers also submit ONIX metadata to cataloging agencies such as national libraries and OCLC. It is expected that ONIX feeds will be used by these agencies to supplement bibliographic records with publisher-provided accessibility metadata. Next. While the work of the cataloger is focused on recording metadata that can be used for searching, sorting, and filtering in support of the IFLA user tasks, in the end, it is the discovery layer that will determine how this metadata will be presented to the user. While displaying metadata recorded in the 532 accessibility note field is relatively straightforward, displaying metadata in field 341 is more of a challenge. Next. Neither of the source codes for field 341 are really user-friendly as recorded. That said, it would not take too much to normalize the schema codes. And while I do not suggest recording ONIX headings in MARC, displaying them instead of the codes should also be feasible. Libraries that can customize their discovery layers may also wish to consider some of the recommendations in the W3C Accessibility Metadata Display Guide that Charles and Madeleine described earlier. Next. The Marrakesh Treaty allows for the sharing of accessible resources by authorized entities across international boundaries. The Accessible Book Consortium's Global Book Service is an online catalog that brings together accessible resources created under the terms of the treaty and makes them available to users from around the world. EMMA is a similar project bringing together resources remediated by North American colleges and universities. The functionality of union catalogs and repositories are enhanced by standardized metadata practices. Developing standards, multilingual thesauri, and best practices for describing accessible resources are essential for the sharing of bibliographic metadata, as well as the resources they describe. Next. To that end, we still have quite a bit of work to do, and work continues on several fronts. As Charles mentioned, the EPUB ONIX MARC crosswalk will be released shortly, though future revisions should be expected. The Canadian Committee on Metadata Exchange has submitted a discussion paper expanding fields 341 and 532 that will be reviewed next week by the MARC Advisory Committee. At the international level, the IFLA Accessibility Metadata Network has been established to work on standardization, crosswalks, and best practices. Outside of MARC, the NISO Accessibility Remediation Group has been developing a non-MARC standard to describe remediated resources. Next. Some of the changes proposed in CCM's discussion paper include adding subfields to describe accessibility hazards, accessibility standard conformance, as well as data provenance. Data provenance can provide information on how and by whom metadata is created in a shared record environment, identifying records created by ONIX feeds or fields and subfields added by individual libraries. Next. The IFLA Accessibility Network has been active for a little more than a year now and is working on accessibility metadata crosswalks, best practices, and vocabularies. The Principles Group will be issuing a draft statement on accessibility metadata principles for worldwide review on June 30th. Next. Meanwhile, what can you do to help this work move along? First, you can talk to publishers and e-resource vendors about not only creating accessible resources, but also about providing libraries with title-specific accessibility metadata. Because it's not just the platforms, but it's actually individual ebooks that determine whether or not an ebook is accessible. Talk to your library, to your discovery layer vendor about indexing, displaying accessibility metadata. Some vendors are still not doing this. And OCLC has only just announced their plans to do this. In your own catalogs, add accessibility metadata, and when possible, upload it to shared databases like OCLC. The more metadata we have, the more we can do with it. You can also experiment and share. I know Collaborative Futures has undertaken some accessibility metadata pilot projects, and we really look forward to hearing back from them on what they've been able to achieve. For those involved in on-MARC projects such as Emma, please advocate for continued interoperability with MARC 21. And finally, please consider joining one of the IFLA AMNet working groups. We have lots of room for new members, particularly those with expertise in metadata or working with the accessibility community. Also, there's the Capitol Digital Accessibility and Academic Libraries Community of Practice, where we have the potential to do a lot of work. So this ends our presentation, and I will now pass it back to Ava to lead the question section.
Thank you so much, all of you, for this wonderful presentation. It's really exciting to have presentations to talk about metadata and cataloging, especially as I am also a cataloging librarian. I will say that it was very exciting to see that DAISY GitHub URL and seeing how from the code, what it looks like on the other end. We did have somebody ask to share that link, and that link has been shared in the chat for anyone else who is interested in taking a look at it themselves. We do have a question here from Mackenzie. So for the group, this is perhaps outside the scope of this task force, but the Entertainment Software Association has been creating accessibility metadata for video games through their Accessible Games Initiative project. She has a link, so I will send that to the chat afterwards. These tags are great, but intended for more for digital game storefronts such as Steam, more than say a MARC record. But it'd be nice to properly encode them in a MARC record as well. Might incorporation or standardization of these tags be something worth connecting to the ESA about, or a later step for this W3 task force?
What do you think, Chris?
I think this would actually be something to bring to the IFLA Accessibility Metadata Standards group. One of the things that we are working on is creating a thesauri or considering working on is creating a thesauri for accessibility metadata that would bring together all these different sources and kind of create crosswalks between them. The W3C group is focused mostly on EPUB. They're somewhat looking at PDF right now and some other and DAISY and things like that, but they all use different accessibility metadata, which is a bit of an issue. And we were hoping to bring them all together through schema.org vocabulary. And that is something I'm still talking with Charles and Madeleine about. If we can really, if those really are specific for EPUB, or can they be applied to other things, including games? Like, I certainly see the hazards being one thing that could be immediately applied to games. Is there flashing and that kind of thing, which would be an issue.
Yeah, and I can say that historically, the origins of this accessibility metadata were in the education field more broadly, and they were meant to cover any kind of resource that might be on the web. The most recent work has been primarily based around EPUB, and so it's been more focused on book-like objects. But there's enough information in the original schema.org metadata about control, like can you use this from the keyboard, can you use it from a mouse, and about how flexible is the design and can you adjust the timing and things like that. So in the original schema.org accessibility features, you may find that there's enough information to cover games. There may be a few things that are missing too, because games have changed since we did that work. But you'll find, I think, more there than in the EPUB specific documentation.
Yeah. I guess this question is from myself as well. As you mentioned, this project requires discussion with a lot of international colleagues and everything. How do you address some of the language or cultural differences when cross-mapping accessible metadata across like systems or platforms and even schema languages?
That's been really tricky, and that's why the crosswalk is such a hard piece of work, and not done, possibly always in progress. The language translation piece was tricky, and so that was really useful. We got some input from colleagues in Europe who did focus groups with people in their regions and said, like, what would you call this thing? Do you even know what this American term means? And so that informed some of the revisions to the compact descriptions to enable better localization. And so now that we've done a round of that, we feel more confident that the messages we're suggesting to be used can be translated accurately and have been translated, as Charles mentioned, into a lot of languages.
Right. And I'd just like to add that, this is an open public GitHub repository. And if there are people can file issues against it, saying that if, for example, the French version wasn't as accurate, there's even options to create a different French version. So we give complete, control over this, that you can update and have multiple different, like this is the vital source implementation for France or French, but there might be a group in Canada that decides, what, this is not quite right for us. We want to make our own version that has slightly different translations, and it's completely available to do that. And again, if there's something that's incorrect, you definitely can offer suggestions or bugs in the repo.
Yeah. Yes, I know as I work with IPLA too, it is a challenging place, a topic, but I'm very glad that we have all of you to kind of help with this conversation and everything. And it's been really great listening to all of your insights and and having all of you share your knowledge. I don't see that we have any other questions. So I think at this point, if there are no more questions, I would say we can maybe close early.